And welcome to
Oh,
Really with Tom and Dave. Hi.
oh,
Hey, Tom.
hey, oh, Dave, how are you?
I'm very well. Maybe I'm overstating it. I'm
You
at
look
least
well.
well. I'm at least well.
You look well.
I feel good. Yes. Well,
You look
yeah.
rested. You look healthy.
I thank you. I've been fasting,
Have
which
you?
I hear is good for you. Yeah,
Wh-
for almost a day and a half now.
You have
I'm
not
doing
eaten food in a day and
doing
a
a
half?
2-day fast. So if I nod off,
Yeah, that's.
well, I guess the term is faint. If I faint during this,
Are you going to
that's the
get
cause.
angry, or
No,
are you
oddly, I
feeling?
feel great. I feel, because I've been doing the intermittent fasting for so long. I think now it's not so hard to
Did you at
fast.
least have a muffin today?
Nothing. I had a tablespoon of yogurt
Okay,
to mix my to put my resveratrol in. That's it.
okay.
Yeah.
Oof. Keep your
Oh,
macros going. Keep
yeah,
some good
yeah.
stuff in your gut.
A lot of coffee. A lot of coffee.
Yeah. Any hallucinations yet?
Not yet. Oh, I'd love that. Uh,
Hmm.
that
Could
reminds me.
kick in. I mean, could kick
Yeah.
in with some old stuff.
That reminds me, I've got some mushrooms in the fridge. I should really,
Whoa.
after. I'll do it after.
Maybe after. I
All
mean,
right.
maybe after, or at least about 20 minutes before we're done.
Yeah.
Just so,
All right.
I don't have to
So
contend
yeah,
with that.
and everything in LA is good?
We can't complain here. Well, we could. I mean, there's plenty to complain about here in
Yeah.
LA, but not that my home is fine. Everything
Yeah.
is. I'm excited for today's
We have a
conversation.
wonderful guest today.
We got a super cool
We have a
guest.
yeah.
It's
It's
good
really
times, and we're not just saying that this time.
oh,
We
no.
really do have a super cool guest.
Yes.
Not that we've
Fantastic
ever,
guest. No, they've all been good, but this is a
they've all
great
been
guest. This is
quite
somebody
good.
who's been, at the forefront of what's been going on in the, disclosure movement and changing the culture surrounding, UFOs, and I'll let you do the intro. I'll
A
let you do
thousand
the intro.
percent, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan Graves is a former FA-18 pilot who currently serves as the executive director of Americans for Safe Aerospace. He was also a major participant in this summer's historic congressional hearings on UAPs. And it is his courage in standing up on this issue has been amazing. It is this now famous footage, which we are about to show you, known as the gimbal sighting, that it seems compelled Ryan into the national spotlight on the issue of UAPs and pilot safety. And Crissy, if you have that, let's play that footage.
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS, though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing. It's rotating.
Very
Still
cool.
amazing. Still amazing footage to see.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Ryan Graves joins us on
There he
Really. There he is.
Hi, Ryan.
Gentlemen,
Thanks for
Dave,
being
Tom,
here.
pleasure to be here.
So nice to see you. It was so great to meet you at the Soul Foundation symposium. How many was that? How long ago was that now? Just a couple of weeks or?
Gosh, it feels like it's been much longer than that. It was quite an event. It was an honor to be there. I'm sure you felt the same way. It was really an incredible event, and I know several people that were there that reached out to me after, said even just today that were like, "Hey, we're still digesting."
Yes.
Digesting.
I wanted to
Yeah.
ask your impressions of, because Dave and I have been trying to deconstruct it like multiple podcasts, just trying to break down everything that
Yeah,
was said. And I mean, what is your general takeaway from that amazing conference?
Gosh, I mean, from my takeaway, at least from my vantage point, as well as say, for me, it was incredibly impressive how pragmatic and how you could have you didn't know what room you were in. You could have walked in any other conference, and that could have been a biotechnology conference. It could have been a machine learning conference until you started listening to the content. It was really a demonstration of the professionalization of the topic in a way that is needed. And that's not always going to be a big excitement announcement or anything like that, but it's this reoccurring cadence of work and effort that needs to happen. And we're starting to see the beginnings of that, I think, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it was the quiet seriousness of it,
Yeah.
and the non-hysterical nature of it was wonderful, and yeah, and again, yeah, the professionalism, the scientific rigor that so many people brought to it, um, which I would say, I think I told you at Soul is one of the aspects of your podcast, the Merge podcast, that I enjoy, that it's such a quiet, intelligent, rational discussion, and,
Thank you,
when
Dave.
you have your guests on, and it's always so informative, and just again, that just that comforting comforting tone of rational, conversation, uh, and as much as, like, I think Saul was a lot of the times, it was, sometimes intellectually exhausting
Mhm.
over the course of a day, that there was so much to absorb.
And it's not just to absorb either, but you have to really, listen and push back against some suppositions that you may have had, some assumptions that we may have been working with for a while. So, it's not just about what can we absorb, but it's a bit of a worldview to have a conversation in such a manner.
Yeah, there was a lot of conversation about disclosure. Uh, where do you fall on is it are we ready for disclosure? I mean, where there was some at the end of the conference some discussion of like is society a lot of the conversation throughout was about how do we prepare? How do we do you feel we're ready for disclosure?
I would I would somewhat disagree fundamentally with the question. I think,
Fair enough.
um, right, we're essentially ceding authority of our ability to interact with what might be just reality to the government. And we're saying, are we the populace ready to engage? Will you make that decision for us? And I don't think
Right.
that's the place of the government. I don't think disclosure is something that we are not ready for. It's already the reality we're living in some sense. It's just whether we know it or not. So, do I believe that there needs to be increased transparency on this topic from the government? Absolutely. I don't think that means we need to spill every national security issue that we have. There's always, I imagine, going to be classified aspects to this conversation, and that's, I think, natural. And I think there's another side of the conversation as well, which is the discovery side of the conversation. What happens out in the public sector and the commercial world to better understand this in a way that isn't controlled entirely by the government
Right.
feeding us information or not? I think those two forces, disclosure and discovery, I think we're already in that process to some degree. I think, we're never going to be ready. I think it's just one of those things you need to experience to some degree.
Well, I think the fact that so many people, sedulously turn a blind eye to the subject, is a clear indication that the public may not be ready, because the public has been conditioned to not pay any attention for so long, and it's still it's only a tiny percentage of the public that is paying any attention. Um, a tiny percentage of the scientific community that's paying attention, a tiny percentage of the journalistic community that's paying attention. So, I mean, there was a lot of talk. A lot of people were throwing around the term catastrophic disclosure at Saul. Like several people were discussing that concept, and so I'm getting the impression you were not worried about catastrophic disclosure.
Well, the way I interpret the conversation, I'm eager to have the videos be released so I can better go through some of what was said. But catastrophic disclosure, for as I understood was being communicated, was that the information was being released in such a manner that was completely outside of our control. So, if say China was to release something, if something was to
Yeah.
happen from a third party actor, from a non-human intelligence that were to make themselves aware without any preparation whatsoever, without any acknowledgement, I see that as the catastrophic disclosure, and and how the markets react to that, how the
Right.
populace reacts to that. It seemed like there was maybe a short window there, and the expectation is that things would steady off pretty quick. But that's how I interpret it from that perspective. I didn't see the catastrophic disclosure as opposed to, say, the Schumer amendment or something of
Hmm.
that nature. It wasn't a trigger that could be pulled. It was these kind of worst case scenarios that could potentially happen.
Yeah. Well, the Schumer amendment seems like it's kind of geared towards avoiding any kind of catastrophic disclosure. That there's a
Exactly.
they in fact title it controlled disclosure, um, um, in a sense that sort of I guess it was, and Carl Nell talked about in his talk at Seoul quite a bit about the idea of of letting information come out gradually at a pace that people can absorb it. Um, and again, I still have this feeling that the people are just going to keep ignoring it until suddenly it is this overwhelming thing that they can't ignore anymore, and they're going to go, why am I just hearing about this?"
Exactly.
And I don't know that there's a way around that. The bulk of the population is going to be blindsided by this when it really does start to come out.
I suppose, the way you would one way to deal with that is the shock is there, but then when they get to look out and start looking into it, they see that their institutions of their government have, organizations that are, at least in some small way, trying to either further communicate or process it or identify these objects. And, we're starting to see the inklings of that with Aero, with NASA standing up efforts, with the Homeland Security Office, releasing files, with the FAA potentially getting involved. So those government institutions are starting to form up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really reassuring, actually, at Saul to see, well, just that the Saul Foundation exists, and that Americans for Safe Aerospace exists, and that Galileo Project and there's starting to be this sense of, like, almost what you're saying, Ryan. Like, well, like the government sort out what it's going to do. It's going to be done in its sort of fucked up fashion. It'll be a little of this, a little of that. They'll pull back, they'll lunge forward, there'll be leaks, but it does seem like owning the power of just trying to create the conditions in certain areas. I think it's really, I think it helps a great deal the way you're focusing on just pilot safety, a very, like, sort of rational way of just dealing with this. And I do want to kind of use this as a way to sort of hear about your experience firsthand. But I found that just sort of as a civilian, like, okay, well, you know what? There's a pretty cool plan B here. If the government, because there's one potential for it just go from one black hole to another black hole, even with the Schumer amendment, right? I mean, it's, in a way, it could just be like,
Potentially,
okay,
yeah.
it's all going well, guys. Don't worry about it. We've got it, and everything's fine. Do you feel that sort of partnership with these other groups? I mean, do you see the potential for that, and is that feel like it's working for you?
So in short, I do see the potential to have those type of collaborations. So there are different stakeholders within various agencies, such as NASA, within Aero as well. I mean, there's a lot of good people. As much bashing as Aero gets, there's a lot of good people that work at Aero that are really passionate about figuring out what this is, and they're hamstrung by limitations in resources and limitations at the end of the day of what can be done as they're trying to do a lot of this historical research. Um, but, to your point, with Americans for Safe Aerospace, with some of these other organizations like the Galileo Project, you named the UAP Integration Outreach Committee from the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, these are all public sector um, investigations into this topic. And yes, it doesn't look like much right now, but that process is going to continue. More resources are going to come into that, more capabilities and technologies, and that's just going to drive the conversation forward there. There's a lot of people interested in getting to the bottom of these questions, and a lot of people realize the government might not be the best place to look for those answers.
Yeah. Now, well, I guess I was going to ask you. You've kind of been on a personal journey with this subject, going back to your military service. Off of Virginia, when you're encountering all of these things, and also encountering the stigma and the blocks that were put in front of you in terms of being able to um, communicate with each other as pilots, communicate with your higher up the command chain. So you went through all of that, um, and then you decided to become a public voice for this. I think, like, the first time I think I ever saw you, I think, was season 2 of the Unidentified series. Was that the first time you
It's
went
season
public?
one, actually, I
Was it
think
season 1?
was
It was near the
yeah,
end of it though, right?
yeah, that was
I'm
my
half
first
right.
kind of public appearance, you could say.
Yeah, which was, I remember that it being an amazing interview, and it was, and it's always that thing where you keep going, "Well, all right, I can't be shocked." But then when I heard you being interviewed and heard, you know, every day for 2 years encountering UFOs, I went, okay, I'm a little shocked by that. Like, that was a level of sort of disclosure and a level of, engagement, uh, that I don't think anyone was ready to hear at that point, and
It surprises me that people were surprised by that, shocked by that, only at the level because when I was in the Navy and, we would go out and occasionally we'd be talking about these events and striking up random conversations with someone, from a brewery or something. We'd tell some of these stories, and at the time they'd be like, "Oh," you'd see them like really stop and think about it, like, "Wow, that's actually, really interesting." And over time, it was just kind of like almost a fun tale that we would tell, until I saw that New York Times article in 2017, when it no longer became a fun issue because we realized there was no resolution coming forward to this. Um, but when I did 60 Minutes and they paused and he said, "Wait, every day for 2 years," I was actually shocked that he was shocked by that because I had told that story many times in those scenarios I just mentioned to you, and it was. I wasn't used to people almost being as shocked as he was. It had almost become so normalized for me at that point.
yeah, I think it was somehow more digestible when you heard the Tic Tac story and, the David Fravor and Alex Dietrich that this you go, "Oh, this was a one-off, a weird, maybe life-altering experience." But the fact that UFOs were such a part of your daily life that they they were really a nuisance issue.
Yeah, well, not just a nuisance, but a safety issue.
Yeah.
And, I can't help but smile when I hear that video that you played with the gimbal video.
That's not you on the video, is it? Or
It's
is
not,
that
but
your
it's
voice?
just my very good friends in my
Okay.
squadron, so I can't help but laugh when I hear their voices. But, they were almost hitting these objects, and when the article came out in 2017, New York Times, I was still in the Navy. I was just at a different command in Mississippi. And so when that came out, I said, "Holy smokes," I assumed this was gonna get resolved during the normal course of events through the normal channels. We weren't thinking this was some UAP, UFO at this point. We just didn't know what it was. We weren't making that leap. Um, but it wasn't being resolved, and that shed the light on it, and that's really the point where I decided I had to try to speak out about it some other way so that this could get resolved because my buddies were still dealing with it and still having mid-airs.
Yeah, now have any of the people on that tape come forward and or gone public, or are they
No, they're both, still active duty, although one is, maybe getting out pretty soon, actually, so, be interesting to have that conversation when the times do.
yeah, and I'm guessing, you're probably I mean, you always, seem to stay very calm about things, but I have to assume that you've been a little frustrated by some of the, I would say, scurrilous debunking of of the data in that video. Um, I mean, so when you hear people with very little expertise suddenly explaining something that the military hasn't been able to explain with tremendous amount of expertise, how do you absorb that?
It is what it is, people are gonna have their opinions on it, but the fact of the matter is, like you said, Dave, they just don't have all the information. When we are using our sensors, our radar system is our primary sensor, our eyeballs are our primary sensors. They declassified the video that was the easiest to declassify because it doesn't have a lot of great data or fidelity to it. I mean, that's the bottom line is why that was able to come out. Um, and so, if you want to disregard all the other information that comes along with that experience, and that's fine if you want to limit your analysis that way. But when
Yeah.
for me, I just disregard it because it's not really a direction to get to the source of truth if you're going to just disregard that
Yeah, I
information.
found that, like, I've gotten into lengthy arguments with certain debunkers until I decided to stop doing that, where I kept
You
saying it's
can't
not
win that argument, Dave.
yeah, I basically just tried to say, "But you
Don't do
can't."
it while you're fasting, Dave.
Yeah, I
It's
was
not
talking
you're
to
gonna
somebody
be
who said
particularly edgy.
yes, that he said, "Well, I'm only looking at the video," and I'm saying, "But that's not an honest way of looking at the data." So you can't just look at the video, you have to also take into account the eyewitness testimony of the pilots. You have to, take into account that there's other data, like, like with the Tic Tac, and I'm assuming also with the gimbal, there was also, a lot of radar tracking going on at the same time that
Mhm.
corroborated what you guys were experiencing in the air. Um, and you can't if you're narrowing your aperture of what you're willing to look at to the thing that you can debunk, and even then, that it's pretty sketchy. Um, then it's inherently dishonest.
Mhm.
which is for me the very frustrating thing. And actually watching it this time, I realized one thing I hadn't really thought about before is like when the gimbal rotates, it also stops.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's pretty crazy because they're saying it's in 120 knot winds. So it's like Category 4 hurricane winds,
It
and
was
it
proceeding in one direction, and then
against
it
the wind, right?
essentially stopped and proceeded in the other direction. And that was my statement, and then the FLIR video existed, and it wasn't many months later until someone, so it might have been, um, dare I say his name, Mick West group that,
Yeah, I was trying to avoid it.
okay, uh,
But yeah, it's Mick West. That's
yeah,
what we're talking
but,
about.
He who shall
his
not be
model
named.
basically proved out my thesis that the object was stopping and changing direction at that point. So, I mean, they may disregard what I say, but what I've said and what the pilots have said in the past have been validated many times
Yeah,
now.
and it's
So,
so
Ryan,
go
I just want to, because I think part of our audience will know your story very well. Part of our audience, because we kind of want to be an on ramp to people just sort of checking in. Like,
Yeah.
I'd love to know just what your very first encounter was, and 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 then I want to tie that to just your training as a pilot, because we had heard some very interesting, a very interesting talk at Saul Foundation about pilot training and observation and what that entails. Can you just talk about your first encounter and then what your training, how you evaluated what you were seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to kind of kick off how we got here, I had joined this squadron VFA 11 where we were flying the F-18 Super Hornet, which is at the time our premier fighter in the Navy. And one of our primary tools is a radar, which we look out and we can see other aircraft out there. And we were flying with what's called the APG 73 radar. We came back from a deployment in 2012, but we started upgrading the radar shortly after that to the
Okay.
new high speed Gucci, as we call it, radar system, the ABG 79. And it took about 6 months to upgrade all the jets one by one. So you might fly with an upgraded jet one day and then the next day back in an old radar. And when we started flying with new radar, we were seeing all these additional objects that we weren't seeing just before with the radar. And so our training initially tells us, and our experience initially tells us that these are most likely perhaps some type of radar error because they weren't behaving like normal aircraft. They were completely
Okay.
stationary, or they were supersonic, or they were in holding patterns. And that was a little bit harder to rationalize being a radar error, but okay, that's where we're at.
But you're
Um,
working out a new software, like you're trying to you're just basically working
sure.
out new
So it's
tech,
like,
right?
okay, are we
And
testing something here? Are there
right.
errors here? But as we, start to lock onto these objects and our other sensors were capturing them, such as our AT FLIR, which is what the gimbal video was, we're now correlating that detection with multiple sensors, different types of sensors, in fact. So now we have high confidence that there actually is something there.
That it's an object. You have something that can tell physically is materially in space
It's
as opposed to
reflecting, it's giving off IR energy, and that's what it's looking to us on our infrared camera. And that's being matched with like a like a ping from the radar essentially at the exact same spot. So it's like, okay, these are two very good indications. So now we have to respect this not as a radar error, but as something, potentially that could be a physical object that could impact the jet. And so from our perspective as pilots, like next thing we want to do is try to go look at it, right? Go
yeah.
see what this thing actually is. And why do we have all these things all of a sudden that we weren't seeing just before? But we don't always have the agency to do that. We might be setting up for a big mission, training mission. There's 14 other jets waiting for us or something of that nature. So eventually when the time was right, and to tell you my first personal experience trying to go get a closer look at these objects is one of these flights where we had extra time, um, very clear VFR day, as we call it, relatively low winds, sunny day, no clouds. Um, and we have one of these objects on the radar. There's several, but we elected to try to what we call merge with one of the stationary objects. So when I say stationary, they're stationary over the ground, which is very unusual
Okay.
for something in the air, unless it's tethered. And if it's tethered, it's going to be kind of bouncing around up
A-
there.
And when you say
Mhm.
several, when your radar is, how much of a expanse does that cover? Like if you're seeing several objects.
Yeah, so I can't use any numbers, but, I'll just loosely say hundreds of square miles,
Okay, all right. So
Mhm.
you yeah.
across various altitudes. So, we're talking a pretty wide swath of area here in front of me, but we only work in certain areas, and I'm really focused on the things that are probably within plus or minus 50 to 80 miles of my aircraft, which is maybe how I'd move around in one of those sub areas. So, and there was one not too far away. So, hey, let's go check it out. So, what we typically do in a scenario, and we do these type of things all the time, where we're coming in at a very high speed pass with another fighter jet. It's called a merge, and that's really how we kick off a dogfight. I'm sure you guys might have seen the new Top Gun movie. Probably saw a couple of merges in that. Um,
Mhm.
so we're used to doing that.
I haven't seen
Oh,
it yet.
Dave,
Don't tell
Dave,
John
oh.
Hamm, he's a
you've
friend of
got to
mine.
you've
I
got to see it. It's
I know.
very good.
I wanna see it, but I
I
haven't
know a
seen
lot
it.
of the pilots that flew
Oh,
in
really?
yeah, it was my
It's like
time frame essentially. I was just on the East Coast, but anyway, so we come to that merge, we start the fight. We're 1,200 knots of relative closure, so a bullet going past, but we're still assessing the weapon loadout. We're looking at whether their flaps are auto dropping down. We're seeing if there's vapor around the wing to see if they're compressing the air around it, to see if they're low energy or high energy. So all this stuff that we analyze,
wow.
even in that
Yeah.
millisecond there. And so a stationary object, I slow down about 200 knots. I'm about 500 to 1,000 feet below it, 500 to 1,000 feet below it, so I can look up at it. Very banal, like easy scenario, right? This is as easy as it gets. Multiple sensors are locked on. The radar is locked into it. We get closer. The FLIR can now see it. Our air-to-air missiles on our wings are locking up to it and screaming at us, giving us a tone to let us know they're locked on. So all our sensors are working and saying, yes, there's something right there. And all that's being projected into my helmet, into my visor. And so as I'm below it and I look up right where it should be, I see a square. It's telling me where to look, and I see the numbers tick down. I'm looking and can't see anything. It just kind of goes
Mhm.
by us. Um,
And
I have a weapon system officer in the back seat, a Wizzo. They didn't see it either. We circled back around, and it was still there on our sensor systems.
so that's gotta be a little creepier than actually seeing a UFO.
It was disconcerting. It's like I have to trust all my sensors. So now
Yeah.
I like have to not trust my eyeballs. So which is not a good place to be, and kind of prevented us from wanting to get that close in the future, because now we can't really safely deconflict from the object, whatever it is.
Are you
Mhm.
normally when you're flying, I mean, and I would know, are you using the windshield? Are you just space, or are you mostly using sensors to know where you are in relation to other things?
The short answer is the sensors, 100%. But we do visual flying. We fly close formation, but the sensor is like using your eyes versus your nose.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So again, going back to the debunkers, when they like to do what, they like to do what sounds like smart talk, and they'll go on and on about how terrible human witnesses are. Um, and then they'll talk about, like a murder scene witness. Um, that really isn't the case with fighter pilots, is it?
It,
We're not talking about we're not talking about normal human beings, casually observing something. We're talking about people who are highly trained and who expect to be debriefed at the end of their missions.
Highly debriefed, yes. So, I mean, we typically at the end of a flight, depending on the type of mission, may debrief for 5, 6 hours, especially for a dogfighting type flight where we'll go over frame by frame what we were doing right and what we were doing wrong.
Yeah.
But that's not to say we can't make mistakes, and we do all the time. But hey, if we say that there's something here and we don't know what it is, and it could be a national security concern, you would think that that's something we should pay attention to and not dismiss just off the cuff.
Yeah, I think I do the comparison that, like, if you ask me to walk through a park and then at the other end of the park say, "What plants did you see?" Then I'll be pretty vague about it. And
Yeah.
if you ask me, "We're gonna ask you what plants you're gonna see in this park, walk through it," I'll be a little better. But if you ask a botanist to walk through that park, you're gonna get a lot more detail. And so when, there are gradations of human witness, and it seems like fighter pilots are probably at the highest level of that gradation, because your lives depend on it. and also just as
And
you
our
said,
lives.
yeah, and you've got these
Our lives depend on it.
and you've got those debriefings that are gonna be hellish, I'm assuming, if you haven't been paying really close attention.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna disagree with anything you said there, Dave.
Well, that's good because I feel really smart about it.
He's always happy when no one disagrees with the so you must be tripping out though when you have so because you're now like either my plane is completely malfunctioning in a
Yeah,
coordinated fashion, like every
Highly
sensor.
unlikely though, but
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, no,
and
I'm
my eyes are dirty liars.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I mean, do you just go, all right, that was fucking weird, or are you going back to your superiors or whoever how you report back and be like, okay, I mean, it could be a cloaking technology. I mean, you might be dealing with adversarial technology.
Yeah.
um you could it have potentially flown on, or I mean, how are you reconciling this? Is it wow, that was anomalous, or that is super serious and I gotta deal with it? I mean, in your initial contact with this thing.
Yeah. So, you know, the initial phase, I'll say, almost was the full 2 years in some sense. I mean, we were so busy and so focused on the day to day of the job that this was not like
Right.
raising that much attention because after like, well, we can't see these things. Let's just stay 50 miles away. It's very easy for us to do that and we'll never ever see it or come close to it. So,
Yeah,
that's not that much distance for us. We can hop over another 100 miles and work somewhere else. So, um, it's very easy to avoid these things, and that's what we did. We put them into it's just a safety bucket as a hazard, and said, okay, if we are acknowledging these things, whatever these things are, here and they are physical, then great. It's very easy to avoid that being a problem by just going somewhere else. Now, over
yeah,
time, it continued to be a problem and continued to be a problem. And now we're canceling flights because there's too many in there, and then we're almost hitting them. And
yeah.
so
It's
it kind of
crazy.
escalated.
And I think some
And
people might hear we didn't have the time to go and look at these things and find that hard to understand if they don't understand what like how your day is laid out.
not
Um,
just my day, even the flight. I mean,
your time in
I
the
only have
air.
like 45 minutes to maybe an hour and 15 minutes of fuel on
Right.
certain types of flights. So every second, like, literally counts. So we can cruise 50 to 100 miles over, check it out, but it might totally disrupt me from being able to finish my training. So
Y
sometimes you just can't do it.
Mhm. Yeah, 'cause
And
your
this
day everything you're doing in the air is very tightly sort of, I guess, not scripted or scheduled and, like, there are the things you need to accomplish while you're up there.
You do have
And
your moments though, where it's
yeah,
like, all right, everyone went home and I got a few extra time here. So on the way out, I'll go check it out. So there were those opportunities. And so that was kind of how we were building this narrative of what was happening. And it was, Tom, to your point, I think a lot of people were just kind of like, oh, fuck, I don't know what the fuck that was, and just kind of ignore it and go about their day. But I think the cadence and the murmur in the ready room and in the squadron kind of got louder and louder as the chatter persisted until one day I walked into the ready room and my buddy was standing there with his jaw open, look of shock on his face, saying, I was hit one of those fucking things. And we all knew exactly what he was talking about. He was talking about whatever these things were, but we hadn't seen them yet. Um, and he
So he
described it
knew
for
he
the
had
first time.
almost so by sensor, he knew he'd almost collided with it, but
well, he had a
had he
visual on
physically
that.
seen it
He had a
visually?
visual, yeah, this is the first time, so it was
Oh, wow.
surprising. He just so he was there's a single point where we entered this basically big box in the sky off the coast of Virginia, and at that point, that's where we enter in, and when we leave, we basically enter out 5,000 feet or whatever below. And so right at that entrance point, him and another aircraft were going in, and then boom, this object went right down the right side of the lead aircraft, about 50 feet off his wing, split the aircraft. He got a look at it for the first time, described it as a dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere. The corners were touching the inside of the sphere. It's hard to estimate distance, but due to the fact that he was right next to another aircraft, he was able to estimate the size to be about 5 to 15 feet in diameter, which is a pretty good guess because that's pretty close to what Aero has been reporting for the circular or the spherical objects that they've been detecting. I think it was 2 to 4 meters in diameter, so pretty
Mhm.
close.
Did
And
that
if
match I'm sorry, go ahead,
no,
Dave.
no, you go, Tom.
Was that the gimbal was different than that described object? So you're
Yep.
seeing at least two different objects, or are you seeing more in terms of different?
Presumably at least two. The gimbal object presumably was different. The IR signature was much different. We hadn't been seeing that kind of gimbally shape. However you want to call it. We were not seeing that and I had not seen that before. I had not heard of it. We weren't keeping a collection, right? So very well someone might have seen it, but we weren't really gathering data. This wasn't my job. I wasn't like the guy totally crazy about this in the squadron. I was, just trying to do my job
And
like
that's
anyone else.
and that's something you gotta be aware of, right? You don't wanna be the guy that's totally that guy. I mean, how do you? Because 'cause you've now got a collision, possible collision, your friends freaked out, yeah, they physically seen it, that has to get reported, right?
Yeah, it does. So we did. We submitted an aviation safety report, what we call a hazard report, a HAZREP, which says, "Hey, this was not a serious incident. We did not cloud this, but it could have been. So please be cautious of this event." And we had to kind of come clean in some sense, or at least the squadron did as a group, that this was happening because we're in this report. We essentially had to say that this wasn't the first time we had seen these objects.
Mm,
And so, if you actually go back and look, I don't know how if anyone's looked at the dates that closely, but there's like several safety reports they're basically submitted at the same time. Uh, and the other ones were predated. So there were events that occurred before that near midair that were documented at the same time and backdated because we want to have a trail of the events. So
Yeah.
as soon as we're like, uh-oh, I guess this is a real problem, then we had to start generating the paperwork for it. So we generated other HAZREPs for other events that were documented but not filed and continued from there.
no, it's interesting, the Navy, I guess I'm assuming this through the fact that certain, Navy intelligence people have come forward and seem to be a little bit more forthcoming with information versus, I guess, the Air Force or stuff like that, but how were the superior how was this taken? Um, was it suppressed? Did emails disappear the way Tim Galladay, Admiral Galladay said that they did when things were reported with NOAA? How was that received?
So I wasn't part of that email chain that Tim mentions. I have every reason to believe what he said, um, but that's just not the level it was at. I mean, it was very much just like a sure I'll pat. Our commanding officer basically overhears us. More or less, he's sitting there, we're chatting. It's not it's not that structured, if you
Right.
will. So he's hearing all the chatter and he reports it up, but it has no place to go from at least the perspective that we can see. There is no reporting mechanism. There's no one that received this information. When we submit these safety reports through the Naval Center, that's not a proactive mechanism. That's simply more or less a tracking mechanism and a communication mechanism. But we're not expecting investigators to reach out to us to help resolve that issue in any manner. So
Mhm.
there, we did what we could, and then we went back to the business of trying not to hit them, but not expecting anything to happen, and nothing did.
Now, since it seems like there is a paper trail of this phenomena happening going back many, many decades, do you think the fact that there is no reporting mechanism, that there was no effective way for you guys to get this investigated, do you think that's a deliberate absence of a plan? Or
I don't know. It's a good question. I haven't seen that directly from my limited time. I mean, compared to most people, but 10 years, pretty limited window into the workings of the fighter community and how that could be suppressed. But, to your point, it's probably been something that's been happening for a long time. So how could that be suppressed over such a long period? And I think it's probably mostly just the stigma, right? It's the
yeah.
stigma, the fear of losing your pilot's license and, getting ridiculed from your squadron mates. It's a tight community. So, I mean, I know that certainly, was a consideration before I came forward.
I was going to ask about that. I mean, that's a big deal, and I just first of all, thank you for your service and thank you for your courage in coming forward with this. What was that like in relationship to your peers, to the extent that you feel comfortable sharing, just in terms of like, or just your own personal choice? I mean, how long did you have to kind of think on that?
I didn't want to say I had that much time, but I had enough. And I made my decision, as I said, when I saw the 2017 New York Times article, and I said, okay, wow, this isn't getting resolved. But before I actually made the decision, I called some of my colleagues that were on the West Coast still, that were on the East Coast still. And I said, hey, are we still having a problem with those
Mm.
objects? And yes, they were. They're like, yeah, they're still out here. We got a notice to airmen, basically a bulletin notice to say watch out for them. But they're still here, and yeah, we're getting ready to go on our next cruise. So see
Yeah,
what
because you guys
happens.
were preparing to go off and do other dangerous things. Like,
Exactly.
at the
So
time
Got
you're experiencing all
a lot
this,
on your plate. Yeah.
yeah.
you guys are heading off to the Middle East, right? That's what you're training for.
Yeah, absolutely. And but, you know, when I wanted to check in with them, and when I realized that they were still having this issue, that's when I said, "Okay, you know, a lot of the people within this community, at least the ones that don't know me, are probably gonna, I'll just slightly say, frown upon this conversation." Uh,
Mhm.
but I felt there was a responsibility to help my peers that were still trying to deal with this issue. And that was more important to me than what the cost would have been for, the people thinking this was something not worth leaning into.
Yeah. So
And, and Dave, to your point, sorry, is that
Mhm.
like, the my colleagues that were flying, they were getting ready for deployment. They have so much more on their plate. They're not UAP investigators. So, they
Mhm.
needed help. They needed help so they could do their job. And that's just what I was trying to do.
Yeah, I think if you're having to scrub training missions because there were too many UFOs in your airspace, and your training missions are designed to avoid you being killed, that's
Not
a pretty
just any
serious
training
problem.
missions, but the gimbal video was taken during a massive workup training mission where we bring out the entire carrier group out there. So you have the aircraft carrier, multiple surface ships. You have all the fighter jets and crew that go on the carrier, and we could basically are conducting a war game
Mm.
Mhm.
out there. And those events were getting canceled due to these events, and those are the
Yeah.
events that Tim Gallaudet was emailing about, that, "Hey, where these events are getting canceled," and these are, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets and money and resources being used for these missions. It's not just a one-off mission.
Yeah, so the threat isn't just that you might collide with one of the things during training, it's the fact that your training is being hampered and impaired.
It is, at a strategic level.
Yeah, so that's a safety threat to all of those the people involved in that training and those maneuvers.
Yeah, it's a national security issue, absolutely, and
Yeah.
then the aviation safety. Yep.
Was there ever a chance, because it's all happening like on the side of missions, it's happening before and after missions, like during, but you're trying to do the mission, but is anyone able to sort of ascertain behavior, ask, like get a sense of like, okay, are they watching us? Are they just here oblivious to us? Do they seem interested in us? Was there anything about the crafts, movements or behavior that felt sentient?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's just so much to unpack there now. Like, a few years ago, I would have said, like, we don't, we didn't, that wasn't our experience, and it's still not. But the more I've been talking to people, the more information I receive, I am hearing, you know, there is clear indication that there is some response to detection. These things seem to, as we get closer, or as we kind of light them up, as we say, with more, electromagnetic frequencies, or radiation, more radars, more sensors on them, they'll respond, they move away.
Hmm.
We'll see them. We've seen them kind of get in the middle of fights, and then the crew knock it off, and they go investigate it, and the thing will take off. So there are reactions. They're not completely out there just doing their own thing as if they couldn't see
Mhm.
anything in the world.
They're aware of your presence and your activity.
Yeah.
It's a sense. Now, there's also, like, people like, certainly civilians who have had, like, encounters with strange craft, um, and I don't know if this is something you wanted to go into, but did you or any of the other pilots that you were communicating with then, did anyone get any sense of an interaction with them beyond just what we consider like a normal interaction, like an intuitive interaction
Mhm.
with them?
So yeah, I understand the question you're asking. Been asked that before. I don't know the answer to that. My experience is that I did not have that experience, but gosh, that would be a hard thing, I think, for a fighter pilot to open up about just on the whim at this, at the stage we were at. So I
Yeah,
wouldn't expect anyone, even if they had that experience, to share it with me at that point.
not even in private moments, that would be too
I mean,
risky?
that'd be tough. I mean, yeah, I mean, I wish I was wrong, but that's what
Yeah,
I
no, I
told.
look, I it's
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's a big thing to admit. I mean, the just because it's so difficult to quantify and it's so difficult to, I was wondering what was your context for UAP or UFOs before any of this? I mean, did you grow up caring? Did you ever see anything? Did you like what? did you have curiosity toward the subject at all?
I mean, I have curiosity towards science and nature and exploration, and there's assumptions that there's other things in the universe.
Sure.
I was a sci-fi reader, but I never like delved into the what we consider UFOlogy. I never had any type of like experience, when I was younger or anything like that. So, when I went to college, I think kind of it was more entertainment than anything else. Not that it was anything more before, but just normal cultural exposure, I would say.
Sure.
Mhm.
And now once you've had this, I mean, sort of in for a penny, in for a pound. I mean, you're getting like all kinds of information coming at you and interaction with. I mean, we're all still digesting the Saul Foundation, which was at an extraordinary level of kind of experts and academics and people from government and just such a, a gathering of expertise. But even beyond that, there's so much to absorb. I'm absorbing. And do you? I guess it's not, do you draw a line anywhere? But what I mean, uh, obviously, it's hard to deal with this without having your mind opened a bit. And I guess where I would go with this is, you sat next to David Grush at the hearing. Just what, and he has quite a story to tell, and it's incredible. And I think and he seems very credible. Um, what was what was that experience like, the congressional hearing, and in relation to sitting next to David Grush, who's telling this story, which is eye popping.
Mhm.
Just walk us through that a little bit. I know
Yeah,
that's a lot, but
yeah,
Yeah.
and was
it's a lot to
were
unpack.
his revelations kind of drawing you deeper into something maybe you didn't wanna go in you were hoping not to have to go into?
Yeah, so I think this question kind of started at like, where do I draw the line on the conversation?
It
And so,
started to,
Yeah,
but then I
because
tend to
we
wander.
we
But
we
okay,
have the
we'll
same
get there.
conversation. We try to. I keep trying to draw a line going, "Oh, that's too crazy.
uh,
I don't have to pay attention to that." And every time I do that, then more evidence comes forward and I go, "Really? I've gotta pay attention to that
yeah,
too?"
Yeah, so I don't. I try to be as pragmatic with where I put my energy into this conversation as I can. I don't approach any portion of this conversation with a presumption of good or bad or right or wrong in the conversation. I'm very much there just to observe the experience or to receive the information and not really make any type of assessment of its validity or accuracy, but just to kind of take it into the data set. So that's really how I approach most of the conversation, and then everything else after that is really a prioritization of how much time I have and what the return on effort is. So, and return of effort seems to be on the most pragmatic stuff. So I love going on rabbit holes and exploring those things as well, but um, it's not my main focus, and I stay on the more pragmatic
Yeah,
side. And as far as, moving into the hearing, like I said, I didn't grow up on this topic. I'm not a UFO history buff. I don't have all that intricate knowledge that UFO community necessarily has. So Dave Grush's testimony was really centered around kind of that more historical conversation around what the government may or may not have done, has been involved with since 1945 or so, and what they've done since then. And that's not my I don't know anything about that.
right.
And I don't make an assessment of whether that information is good or bad or true or false. I have no reason to distrust Mr. Grush. He was appointed to that position. Well, he wasn't appointed to the position, but he was in that position in order to investigate these types of claims. He's not just some random person that came forward with this information. And within my, network and my non-public network, I'll say, there's been, um, many people that have come forward to me to validate, what he has had to say.
Hmm.
Um,
mhm.
so although I don't have any personal experience with what he testified to, um, I have no reason to discount anything he says.
That's wild.
Yeah,
It was sort of the unspoken, uh, but elephant in the room at the Saul Foundation. Everybody was sort of. It just felt like there was all this discussion around the idea that we have craft, or that there's debris, or that there's some, or it seemed to nobody. Of course, we got warned, no classified material. Nobody can discuss anything classified. We're not discussing classified materials. So it felt like there was tremendous inference.
yeah. And the
So
reality of that UAP exists was just a given at that conference.
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't no one was there to prove
Yeah, no,
that
We
the
absolutely.
were going
phenomena
in. Those were table
existed.
stakes.
Yeah, yeah.
What
So
was the hearing like? I mean, how was that experience for you?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it was tremendous. I mean, how does one get ready for something like that, right?
It was
I mean,
standing room only. I mean, it was a that was
mhm.
crazy.
I didn't know. We didn't really have like. I didn't know how to get there, really, right? There was no red carpet or anything, so I just found my way there like anyone else. But I ended up walking
Who calls
behind.
you?
Like, what's that?
Who calls you for that? Like, how do you
It was
find
a
out you're
Was
scheduler,
it
yeah.
Gary
who
Nolan invited you or?
No, it was a congressional staffer.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
It was a scheduling committee. But um, wait, we are talking about the
Oh, we're
hearing.
talking about the hearing or the
Yeah,
Yeah,
or
yeah, no,
me
the
with
hearing. Yeah, that's what no,
oh, I
that's
thought
what
I
I
thought
thought
we were
about.
talking
not
about
Soul. Yeah,
Soul. I
yeah.
thought
No,
we
we're
were
talking
talking
about
about
the hearing
Soul.
still.
Yeah. So
I'm
go back
jumping
to
around.
ignore me. Just
No, Dave, no. Ignore
no,
me.
I'm
It's
I
me.
am.
I don't
I'm
want people
wandering.
to think Gary was a congressman on the side. He already has enough on his
Well,
plate.
look, he's a busy guy.
Yeah.
He's an impressive fellow.
Yeah, I got confused. I messed it up. You know what? I guess this is all bullshit.
Dave, come on. Come and
Get it
bring
out
it,
of here.
reel it in. Reel it in. We're with you.
Mhm.
You're brought in by have you, but you testified before, correct? In closed, I mean, I don't know.
I've
I'm going to
gone so
assume.
I've gone before. I wasn't sworn in, so I hesitate to call it testified, but,
I see.
I did come for the Senate Armed Service Committee and Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, within the Senate, in the 2019 timeframe, when I started engaging them on this conversation.
Yeah, so you'd have had a role in the sudden seriousness of people like, uh, Kirsten Gillibrand and Marco Rubio and in the House, people like, Tim Burchett. I think it clearly had a huge impact on him when he got to talk to you.
Yeah, I got to talk to him a couple times, and in the House, we had great success before the hearing, and I think this was one of the things that really made it successful, was that we were able to get in the day and a couple days before and talk to the chairman of that committee, Grothman, and
Okay.
talk to Congressman Garcia, talk to others there. And some of them weren't even planning on attending that hearing until we said, "Hey, there are some serious national security concerns here that you should be aware of that we're going to talk about. We don't want you to miss." And it really, it just goes to show that I think if you can have this conversation in a serious way, some of our representatives, at least, I won't say them all, but at least some of them are willing to come forward and make this process, better. And that's what we need, just productive, conversations in Congress to move the conversation, expand this caucus of people so it's, widely representative of the American people.
Yeah, well, I definitely think your focus on safety of flight and safety of pilots, more importantly, um, and their passengers in commercial aviation, um, has been a great way of making something that is highly indigestible more digestible for people. That it's an avenue. It's a rationale they can have even within their own internal debate about it.
Hmm.
To allow them again, to get around the stigma and allow them to look at the data and allow them to think, because the conditioning, uh, that, our entire culture has had is not just to not, engage with it, but it's simply to not think about it.
Right.
Mhm.
And, and you're getting, government officials and, fellow, military. I would say mostly retired at this point. I think people have left the service to find an avenue into this subject that makes them feel like they can engage with the information without appearing publicly insane.
It's a psychologically safe conversation.
Yes, and because there definitely is, anyone who dives into this, and I'm sure you don't, and I respect that you shouldn't get drawn into that side of it, because there is the more esoteric and weird part of this all that you get drawn into, and I think that's way down the road, something that people are going to have to deal with. But I think just getting people to wake up and pay attention is the first and most important step. And I think what you're doing is a great strategy and not just a strategy. It's obviously important in and of itself as
Mhm.
well. Um,
Who doesn't want their pilots to be able to report safety issues?
yes, yeah. I mean, well, the fact that Tim Burchett tried to, get like a very short bit of amendment in that would just say that the FAA would report to Congress about when commercial pilots see UFOs, and that was shut down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's got to be a little frustrating.
Yeah.
I mean, because
It-
you're doing so much to open a door for commercial pilots as well right now.
yeah, and I'm talking to a lot of commercial pilots still on a regular basis, and they're still seeing various events. I just talked to a pilot 2 days ago who was flying um, from Chicago, I believe, to San Diego. Um, and much like many of the cases I've been hearing lately, they see a very bright light, appears to flash, almost look like a satellite, until it starts moving in a singular direction, and then it'll start zipping around and orbiting and moving in all sorts of non-standard patterns,
Right.
and it'll be a single source of light the whole time, so you can see it the whole time. That's one of the best ways to tell if it's not Starlink, if it
Mhm.
changes directions while
Right.
you can see it continuously. And then they saw 5 or 6 other objects join it and start hovering basically in a pattern above it. And then they all started shooting down and just disappearing.
Yeah.
And so they're seeing these things on a very regular basis.
Yeah, you've clearly just described the normal behavior of the planet Venus.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's Venus all the time. I that it's so like part of me is the sheer just ubiquity of the phenomenon is what's overwhelming. I mean, because you're talking to pilots, you as a pilot with your you know uh peers and friends and fellow workers, were seeing a bunch of things in the sky all the time. It's still going on. I mean, it's just stunning to me how common it is.
I've
I
had
mean,
pilots.
I guess how would you clarify? I mean, is that true? I mean, how common is it? I guess is my question.
We don't know. We don't know. I've tried to engage somewhat in the international community to learn about trends, about if people in various parts of the globe have been seeing similar patterns, which they have, from South America to Central America to the Northern Pacific and Northern Atlantic. So, I'm not willing to say that means it's worldwide yet, but that's what it's indicative of. But
yeah,
if these things that they're seeing there performing those patterns, they do appear to be in orbit, um,
Okay.
and they appear to be either stationary, which is strange, or they'll sometimes appear to move with the background stars, kind of moving with everything else. So I don't know what those all mean, but varying different behaviors that are we still need to unpack. We are actually going to be putting together at Americans for Safe Aerospace a qualitative report of a lot of these reportings, so we can summarize and provide more of that data out for general research.
That
yeah,
was my question. Do you want Americans for Safe Aerospace to be um, because one of the things that was missing when you were doing it was we're flying was, where do we go with this?
Mm.
Whether it's a conspiracy or not, there was no place to put this particular information, and for it to be assessed, and it was anomalous. It didn't fit any of these things. So do you want to be that for commercial pilots or military pilots, or do you want to just sort of or do you want to create that or lobby government to do that? How do you see Americans for Safe Aerospace working in the next year or two? What would be your goals for it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we've been looking at various options for that. Generally speaking, we want to support the collection of data from government agencies that are closely associated with it. So, for example, we've been um, collaborating on. I'll just say it very lightly. We've been collaborating on legislation that is to that effect. Hopefully, that we'll see that sometime before the end of the year. But um, Gosh, I'm slipping on what the original question was.
No, it's okay. Just like, what do you your goals for
I
Americans
do
for
that all
Safe
the
Oh,
time.
yeah.
Aerospace?
Yeah. So we've been working on, we originally founded the organization so we could provide the general public education as well as recommend policy and legislative changes on Capitol Hill, which we've been doing. We
Yeah.
weren't necessarily expecting to do the data collection to receive these reports from commercial pilots, from potential witness
Okay.
blowers, and process them and handle those claims. But that's something that we have been doing because um, people have been reaching out to us. We've been receiving that information. So we have been formalizing a process to do that. However, we also know that Arrow and other government organizations are standing up their own processes to do that as well. So we're not looking to become the middleman or get in the way of that. But
Right.
if there are processes that need to be done that the government is failing to do, then we're going to step up and fill that gap.
Yeah, and are you optimistic that Arrow is going to, be well, I'm not to judge it in its past effectiveness, but become more effective than it has been? Because it does seem like it was very slow to accomplish any of the things it was supposed to do.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Like I said, I know a lot of good, hardworking people that are within that office that volunteer their time to make that happen. But if we're going to treat this topic with the seriousness that it deserves, we shouldn't be relying on volunteers. We should have a properly funded program that can execute, that has the resources and the access and the ability to validate it has the proper data to be able to do its job. And so, with new leadership and with additional resources potentially from Congress, I think it can be a lot more effective.
Yeah. Do you have any hints as to who the new leader is gonna be? Anyone talking to you?
No, pretty tight-lipped right now, I think.
Yeah.
I vote for you, Ryan. And then Dave is right behind you in terms of mine, but actually, a distant second
Very
would be Dave.
distant, yeah. Because
Yeah.
apparently comedians are way down the food chain on in terms of who is a credible witness,
Yeah,
credible
that's true.
source.
You need a comedian to keep everyone honest.
The press conferences would be much, but yeah, you'd crush on those. So that's
Yeah.
why you think you would be a good. Um, one of the things I was curious in your how much data, how much visual information is probably still available from the sightings of the gimbal and what you experienced that we have not seen. I mean, it must be. Well, I'll let you tell me. I mean, how much video and information is still not seen by the public?
I don't know how much additional data there is with the gimbal. I'll say that there at one point there was radar data. There was the visuals of the data, there was the raw data, all that good stuff. The raw data is probably deleted. The radar imagery is attached to the FLIR imagery. So if they kept the FLIR imagery, they would have had to chop off the radar imagery and throw it away, which they might have done. But I also suspect it may still exist. So
And that would probably apply to the Tic Tac event as well, I would guess.
um,
With that
maybe not,
radar
because
and
the displays were a little different, the technology was a little different. I can't go out
so
too much, but some
so
of
it
the
may have been segregated from
it may have been a little different. Yeah,
yeah.
they might have been using different. Yeah.
That was a good pause, though. I was intrigued by that pause there, Ryan. Um, so, are there cameras on the planes?
Some of
Just
the screens are recorded, yes. So you have a screen and you put multiple things on the screen, just like your phone, essentially. So it just records that screen and whatever you put on it, it will record. And
Mhm.
so,
because one of the
yeah.
things I was baffled by is as when we were going through like balloonamania that was going on last year with this that and this is shot down and that's disappeared but there was a situation in I guess Europe where a Russian plane sort of buzzed one of our planes,
Yeah.
and there was just this beautiful HD like 3D footage or whatever it was just this gorgeous captured the plane and the angles and the corners and I was like, oh, okay, well that we can get this beautiful vivid imagery when they see, when they desire to sort of put it out there, and then but then they can't find they can't find a Polaroid of the things they shot down over Alaska or whatnot. And I was just curious, um is it routine to just wipe all that information data from the planes when they go through, or do you suspect there may have been something more to the fact that we don't have more footage on that?
So I'll answer that, and then I'll answer the previous one, which I never quite finished. But yes, it is regular for us to wipe that data. So we'll load the jet up and we'll take the stuff and we'll wipe it after, and then the next person will use it because there's only so many of them. There's only so much, I can't even imagine the amount
Yeah,
of
where's it going to go? Yeah, it's a lot of stuff to
petabytes of
keep.
data over time. But to your question earlier about, how many photos are out there, I mean, there's thousands of photos. There are thousands of high definition photos, everything that, that would be needed. So
And
it's just a matter of getting
you've
it.
seen
No,
some
I have
things.
not. I'm not going to
Yeah.
claim that I have all the
Mhm.
secret knowledge, but
But most
I've
of it is
been bringing
classified
enough
stuff.
whistleblowers forward through my work at ASA to people in the Senate and people at Arrow that have worked as sensor operators, that have collected data for years, that have, caches of information that, they're bringing forward to
Yeah,
resolve this.
Well,
and
that's good.
and
That's
it
good that
does.
it's coming forward to somebody.
Yeah, and it does seem like at least some members of um, government are seeing things that we're not seeing. You know,
It's percolating, it seems.
yeah. I mean, just to I think the fact that you talk about the Schumer legislation, the fact that that got written, regardless of whether it passes, the fact that somebody of the staff, people that Chuck Schumer and Rounds, that they would write this legislation with the language that's in it, that's certainly mind blowing language, and inconceivable even 5 years ago that anything would be written like this.
I
Um,
agree. Incredible.
you know the and the amount of detail that it seems like I would say it feels like bespoke legislation based on the testimony of people like David Grush and yourself and David Fravor, um, and also on the historic kind of uh, information that's I guess coming forward about the people in the UFO community have been speaking about for decades. That it seems like the fact that he even talks about clawing out the atomic energy exemption from Freedom of Information Act, um, like all the detail that went into it. It seems like they were addressing very very specific bits of information that they've been given. Is that naive on my part
Oh,
to
that's
think that?
completely right. I think they say, it wasn't written in a vacuum.
Hmm.
That type of legislation was written with a lot of insider knowledge and intent. And
Yeah.
to your point, it's an incredible document, and it's incredible to me that hasn't been more widely covered
Yeah.
in the press, frankly.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, there's a great. We were just saying there was actually to UFO name drop. Lou Elizondo sent me a link today to an article in the Hill by Merrick von Rennenkamp, who's
Mhm.
been writing some great stuff for the Hill. Um, about the fact that there's a couple of very powerful Mike Turner and Mike. What's the other Mike's name?
Rogers.
Mike Rogers, who are effectively basically two representatives are looking to kill the Schumer amendment, and it's two people who both are heavily funded by military contractors. One has Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in his district. Um, it's uh, it's one of the things where again, George Knapp is a friend of mine. And he always says the closer we get to the goodies, the more they're going to push back. Do you think we're going to get through this hurdle with this legislation?
I don't know. I'm optimistic. I feel like we will, but even if we don't, I don't feel like that's the end of the conversation by any means. Um, I mean, even a strong opposition to this bill is as revealing as anything else, I would think. If everyone just kind of ignored and they passed it almost, it would almost be disheartening.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
whoa, 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 wait.
I
But
know.
Where's the resistance?
the
It is.
execution on this is gonna take a good 5 years or so to get that spun up. I mean, when you think about how they're gonna like, the reality is, once if and when it passes, they're gonna have to do a lot of budgetary talks and implementation conversation. Then they're gonna select a board, and then they're gonna get reviewed, and it take a few years, before we're at a point, even maybe 6 years before we're actually disclosing information. So in the long
Yeah.
run,
We may be into the 12th year of the next Trump administration by then.
oh my goodness. But if it's an extra year or so, the conversation is not dead if it fails right now. There's a
Yeah.
lot of ways to move the conversation forward in lieu.
It's we're having the conversation. That's what's so crazy. I mean, it's like the fact that like this legislation was written is crazy in a great way. It's just that like the ball has advanced to this point where we're like, I don't know. I get into the trees rather than the forest, and I'm like, oh god, the amendment and Schumer and disclosure will never happen. And I'm like, wait a minute, like this is the I just was so impressed by the Carl Nell discussion at the Saul Foundation, where he was walking us through, as we all saw, where he just said this legislation is disclosure, and the Gang of Eight if not all, many of whom are sponsors, bipartisan sponsors of this legislation, are,
The
you
only
know,
bipartisan legislation
well, certainly the
since
rarest of the
pre-Obama days.
a true unicorn, yeah. And here you have people that have to be read in on the most pivotal, important intelligence matters that affect the world, and that perhaps the executive wouldn't want everyone to know, but so that's why it's just these individuals, and almost to a person, have signed on to the most gobsmacking language that you will ever see. And the fact that the public hasn't caught on, maybe catastrophic disclosure would just go like right over their heads. They'd be like, oh yeah, okay, and they're just sort of go about their day. We're easily distracted public, I guess. But I don't know. I guess I've gone from being sort of frustrated of like, will it, won't it pass, to feeling like this is fucking amazing. This is good, and it's happening on all sides. Like I feel like the dam, there's not enough thumbs to sort of plug the dam. How do you feel about it, Ryan?
Yeah, it's easy to get caught in the trees a bit, but when you zoom out, I mean, we're really, in a bit of a geyser here, it seems, to continue the dam metaphor.
Mhm.
There's a lot going on, and even just a couple years ago, this Disclosure Act would have been insanity, and even a few years ago, the conversation was relatively mature. So, I mean, this is moving forward at light speed, and I think only in retrospect it'll look like that.
Yeah. How do you feel about, being, kind of a pivotal figure in this very historical moment? Not just not for just for this country, but for humanity, for the actual story of humanity, that you may have been, a motivating force in this
Gosh, that's heavy,
change.
Dave. I
Yeah, I
don't
would
know.
imagine.
That's
I would
heavy.
imagine it is.
It's
Um,
true.
But
I
yeah, you and David Fravor, have been had a huge impact when you guys went public.
well, thank you. We'll see what that impact has been here. I think hopefully in the short term,
Well,
but
that legislation was written. I don't think that would have happened without you guys.
well, thank you for saying that. I don't know. Answer your question as honestly as I can, Dave. I really don't know how it feels. It's a bit surreal as this conversation continues to develop. I mean, when I first spoke out, it was a very pragmatic conversation, and it continued to snowball, and more people came forward to validate and stand up behind what I was saying, and here we are. So
Yeah. Like,
it's
when you
incredible.
decided to go, like, you went from, like, just trying to find a way to report it within the mechanisms of the Navy, um, to then you're out of the Navy, and was to become a public face of this, especially, like, even, like, that first appearance on Unidentified. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of great people involved with that show, but was there any reluctance, or do you give a lot of thought to how it was gonna change your life?
It was well, gosh, probably not as much as I should have, but I
Yeah,
was
it's
very
really
nervous.
it
I
seems
mean, I
kinda
was
stupid
nervous.
now when I think about
No, I mean, yeah, I was taking a big leap there. I recognize that. I was breaking, I'll at least say, protocol, if nothing else, because I was active duty at that
Oh, you
point
were
in
still
time.
active duty
Wow.
at that.
I
Oh, I didn't
was.
realize that. I thought you had already retired.
I was still active duty.
So that's a huge step.
Yes, it was the air after I got out. But
Mhm.
I was ready for repercussions.
And did you receive any?
Yeah.
There was action that was, I've been communicated that was taken. It was halted at the last minute, but during that period when I did go to DC, when I did speak to the Senate Armed Service Committee and Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, I was informed not too long ago, about a year and a half ago, that I was actually going to be arrested in DC when I arrived,
Wow.
for potentially being AWOL, even though I was on personal leave. Because my intent was, hey, I'm on personal vacation. I'm going to go do this thing as a civilian. I wasn't there as, Lieutenant Ryan. Um, Not that that was my rationale. Not that that would probably fly in court, um, but that was my mission. That was what I was doing. And yeah, I was taking a big risk. I was nervous. I never thought it would lead to where we are now. I never thought the acceleration of the conversation would continue, but I just thought I was doing the right thing to try to help the folks that were my colleagues and friends that were still flying.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of what did it tell you that was occurring? Did you take that simply as, hey, you're sort of messing with the code or protocol, or did you take it to that the subject itself, the content, might be of concern to the authorities in your world?
I didn't know that occurred until a few years after
Okay.
it occurred. So
Yes, you didn't
I
have a
was
chance
You didn't
to
have a
be
context
blissfully
for it.
ignorant for a while until I was told by an insider who told me, like, "Hey, I was the one that stopped you from being arrested." I was like, "What?" But the way I took it at
Wow.
that time was, I was, I was certainly stepping in something that had some serious pushback. Um, and I knew that at the time. I just didn't see that pushback directly. But it was there.
So
Mhm.
you and then became aware of like, oh, there's like a much bigger, or there's a lot of conversations about this happening in different areas of this like I've just sort of wandered into this world. It must be very, I mean, disorienting and um
Good way of putting it.
to experience that. I mean, did you go like, oh shit, like, I mean, once you found out that information, you were like, oh, okay,
In a way,
I'm
it was almost like, okay, this is my experience, and I have a way to, communicate what I need to communicate. But there's this whole other world behind it that I almost just can't look past that, like what's right in front of me right now, and just kind of deal with that.
right.
So that's kind of how, looking back at it now, almost that I kind of mentally blocked myself from looking too far ahead because it was a bit too much. But, you
Yeah.
know, I engaged with the conversation over time as I had to.
Mhm. And,
Did you always want to be a pilot?
No, I didn't. I always wanted to do something, exciting and fun. I just didn't know what that would translate into, I guess. But it was after my junior year in college, I did an internship and I said, wow, this is really boring. I don't think I could do this.
It sure
So I
is.
quit the next day and I drove up back home and changed my major to aerospace. Decided I wanted to fly fighter jets because I thought that would be the exact opposite of essentially what I was feeling.
So that was that in your family at all? Were there
No.
pilots in your family?
no.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
You
No,
just
I
were
had to
like
have
that.
eye surgery in order to meet the limits and all that good
Oh,
stuff,
yeah?
so,
Oh.
yeah, took a
And
different direction.
do you still fly?
No, I don't, I just not in really a place where there's, um, anything for me to really rent. There's a couple Cessnas for a few $100 an hour, but I'll save my money for something more exciting, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess flying a Cessna around is
Doesn't
probably
Yeah,
seem a
probably
little
doesn't.
dull after an F-18.
Wouldn't mind doing some seaplane work or some aerobatics and something small and light, but, haven't found one yet.
Mhm. Yeah.
What are your hopes for this topic? Like, what would you love to see in this next coming year? Like, are there certain discernible steps that you would love to see either private industry or government take in terms of specifically Americans for Safe Aerospace, or just this topic in general? Like, what would you see as progress?
Gosh, where do I start? I think there's gonna be so much coming up, um, this next year, the year after. I see this conversation maturing rapidly, and outside of just the curiosity factor, if you will, but engaging industry, building, a consortium of people and commercial entities and capabilities to investigate this. There's a big appetite to investigate this external to the government, and I think we're really going to see the machinery of that stand up here over the next
What does
year or
that
so.
mean exactly? Like, how like what would be an example of commercial industry investigating this issue more?
Well, I mean, you don't have to look much past low Earth orbit to see all the various commercial space sensors that are in space right now. All those
Okay.
capabilities are all cutting edge and that can lead to a better understanding of UAP. And those are the same sensors that the US government is buying for their cutting edge capabilities.
Mm.
So if we can get in early and collaborate with those providers, we can gather new data sources to push the conversation discovery forward.
Yeah.
And then you think we can see some some serious shit that the government can't keep us from seeing? Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe Avi
I
Loeb's
like
gonna get some stuff going too, or
I like that.
hopefully he
He's
captures something eventually.
he's
And
digging,
and
man.
and if you had a chance to fly one of these, would you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Maybe not
Yeah.
the little spherical ones, but maybe something more
Some
like the Tic Tac.
yeah, something a little something where you can stretch out a little.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. With a very strong suit to withstand the G's, because it sounds like there's a lot of energy going on with these
Yeah.
craft.
They're Tom, they're in a gravitational bubble.
I have to
Uh,
assume so. Yeah, I don't
yeah,
know.
inertia
Look,
is not an issue. Why do I
I
have to
think so.
explain these things?
I know. It takes me a minute. Takes me a minute. Um, Ryan, this was amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank you so
so
much.
much
This
for
is my pleasure, guys.
Yeah.
joining us for this convo. This was super cool. We hope we can do it again sometime. And just again, like, thank you for your service, and thank you for just being like out there on the front line of this thing, because you've moved the conversation, and you have really had an impact. And I think
Mhm.
everybody benefits from that. And thank you for your continued efforts with Americans for Safe Aerospace, and just all the other ways that you've been giving your time to make sure that people are aware of this and pilots are safe. So anyway, just thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. And it was great to talk with you.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Tom. Thank you, Dave.
thanks for your time, yeah,
Awesome.
and for all you're doing, and for all we assume you're gonna continue doing.
Yeah, you better, give us cool
You
scoops
assumed
down the line.
correctly, sir.
Well, hopefully we can talk again soon.
I can't wait. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Ryan.